Advocate Daily is a series focused on educating communities across the U.S. and world about young policymakers and advocates of color who are making a difference.
The younger generations are the ones who will see the longest-lasting impacts of current policies and systems in place. We see now with sweeping protests and calls for action that millennials and Gen Zers of color will lead the fight forward.
In partnership with the Gathering for Justice, we have curated some of the most tapped-in youth to speak about issues surrounding systemic injustice and racism.
Advocate Daily is a reminder.
Educate, empower, elevate.
You know, for me, tapping into the youth and the next generation is hella important, especially I'm not even a young adult anymore, Conrad. And I think this next generation is absolutely more tapped in than we've ever seen compared to the generations before them. It's actually kind of scary.
I think it's inspirational, honestly. Maybe you could say or young adults have to grow up quicker right now. But, to me, 22, definitely having left kind of the young adult portion or getting towards that place, it's inspirational to see kids younger than me really pushing, because this comes in waves, this fight, and each generation has a different outlook and different trends in terms of what they're into. So to see them really pushing hard for justice right now is really exciting. And that's why we're really excited for Carmen Perez to hop on for this first episode of Advocate Daily.
Thank you guys for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the interview. Carmen.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going. How are you?
I'm doing well.
We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us tonight.
Yes, we do.
Yes, thank you.
I kind of want to just get into it here. The Gathering for Justice, and what does it mean to you?
So the Gathering for Justice was founded in 2005 after Mr. Harry Belafonte had witnessed a 5-year-old girl, Jaisha Scott, being handcuffed. So he had called his peers together and realized that a lot of his peers were probably in positions of leadership or maybe removed from the community. And so he asked my mentor, Nane Alejandres, to bring the younger generation. And so I was invited to the second gathering, which was in Epps, Alabama, on a farm where we didn't have any cell phone service.
What was that like?
Man, it was interesting because you actually had to be present. And this was 15 years ago. So you could just imagine I was a young person, and there was no liquor store anywhere. So you had to be in the conversation. And I remember one of the things that had happened is that the young people had kicked out the elders. And in my community as a Chicana indigenous woman, your elders are actually sacred.
Mm-hmm.
But the tension was the fact that a lot of young people felt abandoned by their elders. And so I walked out with my delegation, Barrios Unidos, and then Simba walked out with their delegation, which is the Afrocentric Rites of Passage program. And so my elder started smudging. He lit sage, and a lot of the young people didn't know what sage was, and so they thought it was weed. And so we got in a circle, and we just started kind of praying. And that really was a catalyst. That's how the Gathering for Justice began, was this tension between the elders and the adults. And ever since then, I've been organizing with them. I started as a youth organizer, one of the national committee members trying to build the organization. Then I became the national organizing director, and now I'm the CEO president. So it's been a journey these past 15 years. My true passion as a young person in this space, 25 years ago, I believe in intergenerational leadership and relationships. And so I'm really big on cultivating the leadership of young people. And so the Gathering is a national movement to end child incarceration. And we have 2 state-based task force, Justice League NYC, which really works on police accountability, as well as organizes a lot around different policies in New York City, and then Justice League California, that is really leading the charge here in the state to close down youth prisons. So we are actually in the 2 counties that still have 3 of the 4 youth prisons that are left in the state.
Carmen, you mentioned the youth feeling a bit of abandonment by their elders. Do you see kind of a correlation to that right now with the way the youth is rising up? Yeah, for how long? Not seeing results and a better future on the horizon.
I think our intentionality when it comes to youth leadership is about lifting them up. And I do know that there are pockets where I think it's different from the 1960s to my generation, right? A lot of folks like Representative John Lewis or folks that were part of SNCC or even the Chicano movement, the American Indian movement. I think that there was probably this, I don't want to say tension, but there was them trying to figure out what they were doing and forgetting about the next generations, right? Where I think my generation, those of us that are in our 40s, realized that we couldn't wait 50 years to mentor someone,
Hmm.
or we had to do it immediately. So mentorship has been something that has always been in my leadership development. Even when I was 17 years old, I was coaching little kids. When I was 20, I was working with youth that were in detention that were actually 17 years old. And so there's always been this intention. But I do know that there are pockets of places where young people are not being mentored, and you do see a disconnect, right? I know that the Gathering for Justice is extremely intentional about intergenerational, intercultural relationships. And so we make sure that we create room and space for young people. And it's not always easy, but certainly making sure that we're not using young people as ornaments, but more so using them to really lead in a space and let us know what it feels to walk in this country as a 17-year-old Black or brown person in this time.
Yeah, I remember when I had pulled up on you and the gathering. I think it was the gathering of Youth Day, and that was Conrad. I can honestly tell you that was probably one of the craziest things for me. Just me being a young Black person, and then seeing a 17, 18, even 16, even younger than that come together like that. And these kids were so brilliant, and
Yeah.
it was very special for me to see that young Black and brown people can come together like that over political issues, something that I was never really exposed to, at least, being a first generation Jamaican kid. My parents didn't really know the ins and outs of the political system, or even voting wasn't even like a thing. Like growing up, I had to go to like high school and stuff like that to learn about it, really. So yeah, I respect the movement that you guys are doing, and it's such an important thing, at least for even somebody like me, and like making that connection with the younger generation too. I mean, I'm 28, but I definitely feel like I'm becoming an old head as the days go on. But I think it's very special. Well, I just wanted to say that it's awesome.
Yeah, I love working with young people like Luis Hernandez, who you met. He came to us at the age of 14 when his brother was wrongfully accused, and we put together a coalition to just wrap our arms around him and his mom, who were actually leading in the fight to free Pedro Hernandez. And when I met him, I remember doing to him what my mentor did to me 20 years ago. And I went up to him and I was like, I see something in you. And I remember the feeling when I was young and I was like, what's this old man saying to me? Right. And little did I know that I had something in me that I had not seen myself. Right. And so I had gone up to him 3 times and I said, one day you're going to realize that, the biggest opportunity you're going to have is actually working with me. And so after the third time, he came on board to be a Justice League member and then ultimately started coordinating Justice League. And that was something I had been doing because I was one of the founders. And now he's our youth engagement and leadership coordinator at the age of 18. And, I don't know how to, one thing I do know how to do is engage young people. But when you bring them on board to your team, I kept hearing fight for 15, fight for 15, right? Like, how much do you pay an 18-year-old?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, you got to pay them, what they're worth. And he's so brilliant. He put that together with his peers. He wanted to do what we had done early on 15 years prior. And, he did a phenomenal job, and he's so brilliant. He's so articulate. He thinks of things that maybe I haven't thought about, and he does it so much more seamless, right? Like to your point, I didn't grow up with parents that were political. Our identity is political as Chicanos, as Mexican Americans, as intersectional people. Our identity is political, but they weren't necessarily involved in politics. And that's why we got to guide young people. We got to give them opportunities to lead us and also make mistakes. I wasn't perfect at 17, and I'm not perfect at 43. I still make mistakes. And so one thing that I really want to do away with is like this flawless leader or flawless leadership that we think of when, Dr. King comes to mind, or when Alla Baker comes to mind, or Diane Nash, right? These folks did have flaws. And, one of the things that I want to make sure in this space is that we're working towards building that beloved community, but not harming ourselves or even the community by building that together.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on being black or brown. Our identity is kind of a protest, and this is something I've been saying. I didn't even realize it until you start seeing a whole bunch of people pop out with signs. It's like we've been protesting for so long. And it's like, what was kind of the first instance for you where you kind of realized that you were different, and how do you help a young black or brown person kind of realize that from earlier on, if they shouldn't even be looked at as different, to be, in my opinion. But you know how does that kind of transition come about when you're dealing with the young people in your organization?
Well, when I was young, I'm the youngest of five. I have three older brothers. I had a sister that was killed and buried on my 17th birthday. And so I really value what she taught me through her death was actually how to live. And when I grew up playing basketball. So my uniforms were either red or blue. And we know that in the state of California, red or blue means Crips or Bloods, right?
Yeah.
And there was a night when I was about 15 years old. I was either 14 or 15. It was my freshman year. I was playing varsity high school basketball. And my brother picked me up with my sister and my little friends. And my brother was giving my friends a ride home. And the police stopped my brother. And they said that he met the profile as somebody who had just shot up a liquor store. So they pulled him out of the car at gunpoint. They pulled all of us out at gunpoint and they hogtied him. They tied him like a pig. And I remember as my sister and I were sitting on the curb, a police officer who was a Latino man went up to me and my sister. I was like, why are you holding us? We didn't do nothing. And he's like, nothing's not a word, it's anything. And he like was mocking me. And he basically didn't think that my sister Patricia and my brother Carl, that we were family. So he separated us and started questioning us. And so that stuck with me. I went away to college. I went to UC Santa Cruz. And what I realized is that none of the people I went to college with had ever experienced this type of trauma or injustice that I experienced in my community. And so, when I think about our young people, they're seeing it every single day on their cell phones, right? Every single moment, there is a new story of somebody being killed at the hands of police. And
Yeah.
so, of course, it's political for them. Of course, like for me, when I say I do this work, it's because it's personal, right? These young people at this moment are like, I don't even know how I'm going to survive tomorrow. I know I'm sure you walked around thinking, am I going to make it to 21? Am I going to make it to 18? Am I going to make it out the hood? Am I going to like that? Those were conversations we were having. And so I know that in this current political climate, like it's personal, right? Young people get involved and and because there's so much anger and fear in their heart, like, and it's righteous, right? And so my job as an organizer is to channel that righteous anger, that righteous pain into action, right? It's the reason why when you said, I'm an old head, like, I'm 29 or, however your age is, I'm a bridge, right? I've always been a bridge. I've always been, although even when I was like 24, I was an old soul. And I've always known that my responsibility in this world was to be a bridge between those that had access and those that didn't, those that had freedom and those that didn't, those that had resources, those that didn't, right? It's always been a bridge. And what I tell my young people is like, who do you want to show up in this world as? Are you the person that's going to sit on the sidelines? As you know, I'm a basketball player and criticize, or are you going to go into the game and play your heart out and make sure that you win that championship, right? And that's really what liberation and freedom is. It's that championship. It's keeping your eyes on the prize. It's making sure that you have a common goal. And we may do things very differently, but at the end of the day, it's about getting up, standing up, and doing something.
Right, right. In terms of, police brutality, nothing has changed except the invention of the cell phone. Everybody can take a video now. But I think what has changed, and kind of what we're seeing from the younger generation feeling more courageous and emboldened to speak out and to organize themselves, is that, when everyone has a phone and access to going online, you have more information at your fingertips, you have more ability to speak to your peers and to make change. Whereas, I think years ago, where is a kid going to get that much power as frequently?
And that's so true. I just got off of a conversation with somebody who asked me the same question, right? Like, what's the difference between now and then? Well, the difference now is the fact that, like, Rodney King, right? He was videotaped. Everybody knew what happened to him, but the jury that let go of those police officers were all white, right? And so if we talk about, I was speaking to my professor, Aida Hurtado, because I'm really about uplifting Black and Brown solidarity as we see so much anti-Blackness that happens in the Latino community. I was telling her, I heard something different growing up from my father, who was actually Chicano, born here, and so one of the things that she had talked about was the lack of empathy when it comes to white jurors because they don't live in their intersectional identity, right? Versus, people who are people of color who live and can empathize and can be like, damn, that could be my brother or that could have been my uncle, right? You empathize because you live in your intersectionality. But it's so true what you're saying around the fact that there is this gadget that we have that has access to information, but it's still about creating the systems and organizing around building collective power. So one of the things that I recognize in the last 6 years, 7 years around organizing police brutality is that Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, was not just about affirming Black life, but it was also about coordinating the efforts across the world around police brutality. It gave us an opportunity to know that as we were organizing around the death of Eric Garner in New York City, that there were people organizing in Los Angeles, organizing in Atlanta, organizing around the country. If you just look up the hashtag Black Lives Matter, right? So there was an infrastructure that has been put in place where these three women who created the hashtag, who created the movement, began to say, we have to build a sustainable movement. And what does that look like outside of a hashtag? And that's really building the infrastructure that allows us and the young people that we're talking about who are now empowered to speak the opportunity to feel as though they're connected to something larger than themselves. Because my brother Carlos, who was being hogtied and held at gunpoint, or myself, who was being told that nothing was in a word by that police officer, did not have a vehicle in order to feel connected to something that was going to help me feel as though I was protected from the same police officers that were consistently surveillancing us every single day, right? And so I think it's a combination of the climate that we're in and the organizing that has been happening for the past couple of years around Black Lives Matter.
What did you think? I just have a quick question just off of that. I know that Conrad had mentioned that, we are in the age of information. Do you think there's any kind of negative side effect to it? Because we're also in the age of misinformation as well. And I don't know if you peeped some of the people that were doing even like the Blackout Tuesday, they were doing the hashtag Black Lives Matter as well. And it kind of blacked out that whole post for a while until people obviously recognize. What do you think is the kind of greatest or some kind of advice you can give to people that or at will to get misinformed?
Well, I think that's a very complex question, and it's a very valid question, right? I think people are trying to do the right thing, and then they often they create misinformation in the midst of trying to do the right thing, right? And so as that hashtag was going around and people were blacking um, their photos out on Instagram or on social media, I was getting called out for not doing that. And they were basically trying to say, well, Carmen, I thought you fought for Black lives. Like, are you being anti Black? And I was like, no, that actually is for the industry that I'm not in, right? I'm an activist. I have to constantly share information. We're organizing protests every single day. So I want to make sure that I'm not blacked out because of the fact that, I want you all to show up to these marches or these protests, right? And so there was like a form of education that needed to happen. But I will say that that's not always the case, especially in this call out culture that we have.
Yeah.
Right. And as you may know, myself, Tamika Mallory, and Linda Sarsour, when we organized the largest single day protest in the history of America, along with hundreds of women, called the Women's March on Washington in 2017, we did that not against Trump, but because we were organizers, we created entry points for people to get involved by creating the unity principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that we created intersectional feminist lens, but also connected the issue from immigration reform to criminal justice to housing to whatever it may be. And when you do things like that, you often become the target. And what the target looks like is you get called names. And as three women of color, the way in which they try to discredit us in our 25 years of organizing, because Linda has been in this movement around, immigration reform and Muslim rights for 15, 20 years. Tamika Mallory, we know, came through the National Action Network, and she had been organizing around police brutality for decades, right? I've been working around probation and prison reform and racial justice, Black and Brown solidarity for 2+ decades. The way in which they try to discredit us was to weaponize anti-Semitism against us by saying that we were anti-Semitic because there was a photo that we had taken with the Minister Farrakhan 3 years prior.
Wow.
And he had said some things around the Jewish people. So I just want to take us back a little bit. Where in the history of America have you ever seen a woman getting taken down for something that another person said? Never have you seen that. But they tried doing that with the three of us. So to your point in regards to like just the information that was out there, there was a lot of misinformation. People took photos from our Instagrams, from our social media, and plastered it up there when we had co-organized Justice or Else. We were brought in to clean up the mess of white women during the Women's March because of our organizing skills and because we had just organized Justice or Else, co-organized it with the Nation of Islam and the Minister Farrakhan. So that was known. It wasn't until they saw the impact that we had around the world, right, that they're like, actually, let's take these women out. And so I will say that the internet for me is a tool that can certainly share information or spread information in a way that is helpful, but it also needs to be complemented with organizing with folks on the ground, right? So you can't just use the internet as your source of information. You have to make sure that you also further investigate the story and that you begin to work with people on the ground, specifically in your own community, to make sure that you're also organizing people around an issue and into something that is going to come out in a way that is beneficial to all people. But I have to say, for those 2 years that I was accused of this, specifically because I had just had a baby, or I was 4 months pregnant. I was going through that process of like having a baby, and then my baby it flared back up. But there was a lot of death threats that came our way, a lot, and it really silenced us. But what I did not stop doing, I did not stop organizing in my community with Black and Brown folks, and that's really who my community is. I certainly feel that, like, again, there's something about social media and these little phones and these cameras that we have, I think it's a way for us to get information, but we also have to be very careful when it comes to the information that we share, because not all of it isn't true.
Yeah, I completely agree that we have to be responsibly present, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You spoke a lot about intersectionality, Carmen, and I feel like we can see that such vitriol and misogyny against women. Trump against Congresswoman Omar and AOC constantly. But to segue, I wonder if you could speak at all about the New York Justice League.
Yeah, so Justice League NYC is a task force that I co-founded with Marvin Bean, Angelo Pinto, Linda Sarsour, and a bunch of other people. And really what in 2013, what I was feeling was I was feeling this sense of foundations not really supporting the type of work that we were doing, considering that we were doing effective work, but again, the work that we were doing was really risky when you work on police brutality. And so what I really felt was important was that we come together. I respected Tamika, I respected Linda. I really thought, and it was for my generation, right, to build collective power. I always say we come together like Voltron. And really that's what it is like we are a bunch of superheroes.
That was a fire reference.
Seriously.
We come together like Voltron. We are a task force of people that are impacted by incarceration or formerly incarcerated. We are Muslim, Black, Jewish, Latino. We are everything in this space. But we all have a certain skill set. And it's just like, I truly believe that coalitions are so important to build when you're working on something, or to build collective power to make sure that people feel informed. But, one of the things that we saw was the ability to build something together, and that was Justice League NYC. And so a lot of what people know us as is we work on policy and coalition with other organizations. We also organized March to Justice to shed light to police brutality with the Justice Package 3 criminal justice reform bills. And that was a 250-mile march, 9 days. It was very difficult for those of us who were organizing it, but we brought 100 people along with us from New York City to Washington, D.C. We also organized the Dream for Justice March, which was on MLK Day, again, to shed light on police brutality. We developed the I Can't Breathe t-shirts that were delivered to the net players through Jay-Z. And then recently, we just organized a march called Stolen Lives, Looted Dreams, hashtag the Take Back. And that was really,
Yeah, we pulled up.
yeah,
We
you were
actually we
there,
actually
right?
saw you at that march.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I organized it from California. I flew in. We started organizing it. We put the demands together on a Sunday. On Monday, I presented it to Justice League NYC. We started organizing it 3 days. I came in on a Friday and then was out there on Saturday. There's 35,000 people that joined us. And the reason why we called it hashtag Take Back was really, one, we wanted to center the Black voices within Justice League. There are phenomenal people that make up Justice League. It's not just the people that you visibly see, but there's about 40 of us: Karis, Tammy Lee, Bria Baker, Matt Graham, Jerry. But I wanted to make sure that we were centering Black voices. And one of the things that they had expressed to us was that they wanted to make sure that we took back the narrative. Right, as people were saying, protests were out there looting, and especially looting in communities of color. They're like, we want to take it back and show people what we're actually marching for. So we marched with 5 demands. One of them was to defund the police and reallocate money from the police department to youth services, to youth employment, to community services. The other one was to repeal 50A, which was a police secrecy law. So there's all these different things, and we had 35,000 people. It was, I thought, a huge success. The next morning, the mayor did a press conference where he actually named out some of our demands. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like, on top of, protesting, you have to also organize in community around policies. And so that's what we do. We also worked on the Meek Mill campaign to free Meek Mill. We were one of the organizations part of that coalition. And like I said, we come together like Voltron. One of the things we do really well is show up in masses and change the narrative and take it back. And it's because, we feel it's important that as we're in a time where there's so many things happening across the world, we have to make sure that we center Black people, that we center Black voices, and that we follow them during this time. So that's what I'm committed to do. Even as a Chicana and a Latina CEO of an organization, I also have to recognize that there are a lot of Black folks in my organization that also need to be uplifted. So
What's the hardest part of like organizing, like a march? Like, let's say the Take Back. What is the hardest part of doing that? Because getting 35,000 people to basically pop out is no easy task.
I think it's organizing your own team to make sure that you're on message, right? You want to make sure that you center certain people's voices in the space. But, I don't know if that's a fair question. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been doing this for so long, I could do it in my sleep. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm like, wait, that's not a fair question because, and I think it's just not sleeping, right? Like I'm 7 months pregnant. I just learned on Monday because an email told me that I was 7 months and a week pregnant. And I didn't sleep that whole week, right? I was like thinking about the demands. I was thinking about the stage. I was thinking about making sure that we had enough t-shirts for people, that we had enough palm cards for people to know what our demands were, that we had a lineup that was representing the community that we serve, that we had inspirational speakers. So those are the type of things that I think about, like, are we going to have a stage? Are there permits? Oh, wait a second. New York City is not giving permits for staging, because if they give us a permit, then that means that they have to give, Summer Jam a permit. So, there's things that you have to put into perspective because you're thinking about the safety. As an organization, you're also responsible, or as a person organizing it, you're responsible for the safety of all the people, right? So we had to reach out to organizations to make sure we had PPE wear and we were able to hand it out to folks. And also, making sure that we were intentional not only about centering Black voices, but also honoring the land that we stood on. And so we brought in an Indigenous elder to make sure that he gave the blessing for us to march. So there's just a lot of things that you have to think about. It's not easy. Some of us take on more of that role. And then on top of, organizing, sometimes you have to speak about why you're showing up. And as a Latina in this space, I think people want to know, why do I keep showing up? They're like, why do you march for Black lives? Why do you? And it's kind of like, a lot of people talk about doing Black and brown solidarity work. I never thought about that because I grew up with Black and Samoan people in my community, right? Like Chicano. So I never, at the age of 5, when my basketball coach, whose name is Pat Bow, or Coach T, would show up and they talk to my mom, I wasn't like, oh, he's a Black man and my mom's Latin. I never thought about those things.
He's just a person.
It
Yeah.
was just part of my life. And so my organizing is a reflection of my childhood. I grew up in a very diverse community. I grew up with Black coaches. I grew up playing sports and thinking I was a hip hop dancer. So that's what you're going to see in Justice League NYC. That's what you're going to see reflected in the gathering, is the merging of culture, the merging of activism, and allowing people to show up with their whole selves, right? And that's really who Harry Belafonte, our founder, is, right? He was a calypso singer. He was an activist who was part of SNCC, or a confidant to Dr. King, and funded SNCC, but then also did USA for Africa, has always been an activist. So I think we're kind of like the perfect match. The fact that I thought growing up that my culture was hip hop and basketball. And little did I know I'd be an activist for the rest of my life.
I feel like I definitely can't let this one slide, but what's good with this hip hop dancing?
Oh man, you don't even, I could break dance.
That's crazy.
No, I love dancing. MTV was hot back then, back
It
in the
was.
day. And my brothers were older, they're musicians, and so we had the drums playing in the house, the saxophone. So I just love music, but hip hop was my era. Like it was, KRS-One. I remember DMX, Wu-Tang. There's just a lot. Man, but we also used to listen to a lot of like gangster rap, and it was only because of my older brothers, not because of me. But
Hmm.
yeah.
For lack of a better term, passionate or just kind of uproarious some of the protests could get, understandably. Yeah, you see a lot of dancing and singing during these protests or during these community gatherings. What does that mean to you? Because it really is, in many senses, also a take back of music that was kind of adopted by white people, like jazz or techno. So
Rock.
I feel like,
yeah.
again, one of the things that I really encourage is people showing up with their full selves, right? And like when you see people dancing out there, or when you see people rhyming. My son Lennon is a person who was part of Justice League. He's formerly incarcerated, but he was always spitting some. I'd put him on the spot. I just kind of feel like I just want people to feel joy. Like there's always sadness. There's always, but you could. Mr. Belafonte talks about his mentor Paul Robeson saying, "Artists are the gatekeepers of truth. They're civilization's radical voice." And I truly
Wow.
believe that, right? Like the fact that my son could reach a broader audience than a Carmen Perez can. When we dance, we feel connected to one another. When you hear the beat of a drum, it's connecting to your heart. Like a lot of our indigenous elders, when they're playing the drum, it also is part of like our connection back to Mother Earth. So, I'm all for it. I always, I jump in line. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't know if I could really do this anymore. There's certain things that I don't really know I could do well, and I'm okay with that. That's why you got to let the young people lead. Um, Even the marching and the chanting nowadays, I'm like, well, I lost my breath. I got to go sit down. But at the end of the day, you just there are things that you just that I think like songs, like all that has always been part of the movement. It's never been separate of, right? And I think what we understand is that white supremacy institutions try to separate us. Like if you look at prisons, your dignity is separated from you, your culture, your relationships, your identity is stripped from you to take you away from who you really are. And so in these spaces that we create, we want to make sure that people feel whole. And that's why you see music, you see dancing, you see young people, because all of it is necessary when you're out there protesting or when you're out there at rallies.
Yeah, I definitely was. As soon as I pulled up, I definitely put the Nipsey Hustle in the headphones and just started bumping crazy as we were walking. Just pretty dope. I love Nipsey, very conscious rapper, and he spoke on a lot of the things and taking back ownership of what was ours. So definitely related with me heavy. I definitely shed a tear or two as I was walking too, because it was just kind of it was emotional. It was an emotional thing, and I don't know. There wasn't any kind of movement like this, at least what I've seen in my life. And right now, it's kind of disappointing that it took innocent people to die for us to get to this point. But, I know that we're going to see change. And honestly, it's not only up to us, but it's up to everybody coming together. And, I have a huge appreciation for what you do when it comes to this organizing. Because like even before I pulled up to the take back, pulled up to a couple other protests too. Like I live in Westchester, so I was able to go to an Austin protest as well, which was like interesting. But I ended up popping out to the riots and stuff too, and I was just like, this is not what this is for, And that was also a shocker too. The people looting. It's like I remember even pulling up on a white person or two and just being like, stop, because now you're making us look kind of like crap. This is not what we're fighting for. I remember I was even covering just like being there and what was going on. I didn't even put that any hashtag RIP George, because it wasn't the proper representation. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
Which is so true. It's the reason why our Justice League members felt it was important for us to put out demands and to put a run a show, right, of different people speaking so that we could redirect people's energy, because they did feel exactly the way you felt. They felt like, wait a second, what are you doing to our city? What are you doing? You know, I know that my son put a march together in the Bronx because Fordham Road was looted, right? And he's like, this is our community. And so the hashtag, the take back, was really, again, to take back the narrative, right? To remind people why you marched or why you protest. It was about Black Lives Matter. And when you're out there, it wasn't about putting Black people in more danger, right? And I think that was really what we were, you know, and I will say, in the past, like, if you had ever been to our MLK march, our Dream for Justice march, you know, we were marching. The Zulus would bring a big old loudspeaker and they would blast music, and it was just like moments of joy, moments of sadness. I remember when Glory played. It was 2015. Um, Glory had just come out from Common and John Legend, and that kind of became our anthem when they said the League of Justice, right? Or like, put your hands in the, or your fist in the air. Again, like, there's just so many mixed feelings, and one of the things that I know is important for the people that are in space with us um, is, as we're organizing some of these protests, is to also not put more of a burden on some of the folks that are also feeling the impact of what's happening every single day, you know? So that's why some of us take on a little bit more of the organizing, and there's like a role for everybody. One thing that I always say is that there's a role, there's a lane for everybody. What do you do really well? How do you bring that to the cause, right? And there are moments when some of us, like, you know, Jules, who is the white woman in the space, right, or myself or a Chris, we have to do a little bit more of the organizing, considering the fact that we're trying to center certain folks and not have them take on a load when they're already having to deal with crisis every single day. So yeah, I feel you, and that's why it was so important for me to even go back out to New York City, even under COVID. My husband was like, "Are you crazy, babe? You're pregnant, like." We have a baby that's not even 2 years old, and you know, he's like, I know you love your people and I'm here to support you, but just know this is really hard. And it's hard for us as a family, but you know, I felt really responsible to go back home to New York. Although I'm here in LA right now, I go to New York at least once a month, in the office, to be with my team, and I felt really responsible to go back home to make sure that, you know, the march was a success, and that the people that we were organizing and centering felt seen and felt loved and felt heard. And that's really what they got away from it. I remember in the back of the stage, two of the young women that are part of our Justice League team were crying, and they're like, never in my life have I felt so seen like this, right?
Yeah.
Like, thank
Wow.
you. And so that for me is always worth any lack of sleep, any sacrifice, any 6-hour flight under COVID, is the fact that two women who had been so hurt and felt the pain of their community felt seen, felt heard, and felt loved.
Yeah. And then even touching on, you know, bringing your kids with you, what is it kind of like to be a mom right now?
Yeah, it's so, you know, my baby is a movement baby. I met my husband at a solidarity summit. So we were practicing a very different type of solidarity, which is beyond Black and Brown solidarity. And so my baby, we call him Baby Justice, because
That's awesome.
he's a movement baby. He's gonna, you know, his father is involved in policy work here in the state of California to reform, to dismantle the prison industrial system, right? He's also formerly incarcerated. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and so it's inherently gonna be passed on to him.
Hmm.
But I am pregnant, and it's very different being pregnant under COVID. You know, there are moments when I don't know what month I'm in. You know, I don't get to have doctor visits the way I used to, and recently something happened to my husband and my son. And mind you, my son is Chicano, indigenous, and Black. His father is Black, and I'm indigenous and Chicana. But my husband took me to the hospital so I could get an ultrasound. Unfortunately, because of COVID, no one is allowed to go into the doctor with me anymore. So my husband had to stay outside with my baby. Usually we all go together. And there is a white man that called the cops on my husband, said that he looked suspicious driving around in a Mercedes. So as I had come out from my ultrasound, I was texting or and calling my husband, and he wasn't picking up. But I could see down the road that he had gotten pulled over, and my heart stopped. It sank because all I could think about was Philander Castile. All I could think about was
Mhm.
all these different people who had been stopped by police and ended up dead. Sandra Bland, right? And I'll be honest with you, it was really hard for me I'm pregnant, so I'm also emotional. So when my husband finally comes up, I was like, what happened? And he told me, oh, apparently somebody called the cops on me because I look suspicious. And I was like, suspicious of what? Driving a brand new car? Like, you got my baby in the back. So there's been a lot of things happening in the Asian community with Trump and COVID, right? And like him saying some really racist things. And so the police officer that pulled over my husband was an Asian man and felt really bad that he had pulled my husband over because my husband was clearly waiting for me to get out of the doctor's office, right? And he also saw my baby in the back. But it was hard because I this is my work. There are moments when families don't get to say goodbye or don't get to say what happened. And so as I was trying to hold it together for him, because I didn't want to impose my stuff onto him, it was hard. It was a hard conversation that we had to have because I'm married to a Black man, and my babies are half Black. And the reality here in the state of California is that Black and Latino men get killed by police. We make up in the
Yeah.
state of California, we make Latinos make up about 39% of the population, but make up 46% of the killings by police officers here in the
That
state.
doesn't make any sense.
Right. And so again, right, it's just kind of what's it look like to raise children in this time. One, I'm really hopeful, but it's also a little scary when situations like that happen.
Of course.
Just sort of to wrap up, I know we've been talking for a while. Time has gone quickly because this is a really important conversation to have. But Carmen, you mentioned Mr. Belafonte as the founder of the gathering, and you mentioned how he had a mentor, and you mentioned how Mr. Belafonte mentored you, and how you saw something in Lewis. I think that's one of the most beautiful things you said, and that I've heard, honestly. I feel like the gathering obviously is about, you mentioned intercultural relations and intersectionality, intergenerational communication and organizing. So I guess just, to close, if you can talk about anything more on raising the youth up, right? How can they be courageous right now in this fight?
Of course, I just want to remind young people that in every movement in the history of America, young people have always led. From the American Indian movement, from the Chicano movement, the United Farm Worker movement, to the Black liberation and the civil rights movement. And really, it is their time, it is your time to lead us. And there are many of us that are here. I know that my sisters in the movement, like a Tamika Mallory, like a Linda Sarsour, there's so many of us that are willing to mentor and femtor you all, right? To mentor and femtor young people. But just, I want to remind young people of their worth. Your biggest gift is the pain that you carry and that you could channel into something beautiful for the world, right? There's nothing wrong with young people that come from the hood, that don't have the traditional family, that don't have the same opportunities. There's actually something beautiful about that. And one of the things that I encourage is, how do you transform? I grew up with a lot of pain, and it was my responsibility, and my mentors also helped me transform that pain into action, into a gift that I could give back. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we always say that young people are the future. You're actually the present, and you're the greatest gift that we have. And it is our responsibility to cultivate you, to nurture you, to protect you, but it is also your responsibility to reach back and be like, yo, I need some support, or I need help, because we're always going to be here. Let's not reinvent the wheel when there's already been a lot of wheels that have traveled through time. Let's just make sure that as you're trying to develop something, that you also make sure that we get the wisdom from the elders while they're still here. That's something that I miss about my father, is that I learned so much history from my father, who at the time of his death a year ago, he was 94 years old. And so that's why I always say the organization, the Gathering for Justice, is a reflection of my life, because Mr. Belafonte is around the same age as my father. And I have nieces and nephews that are as young as, 2 years old. And so our young people, I know that they're ready. They've always been ready. We as adult allies or bridges or conspirators also need to make room for our young people to lead us, to cultivate relationships beyond our personal reach, and to also give them the resources that they need in order to succeed.
That was amazing. Thank you, Carmen, so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we're definitely looking forward to continuing this series with you guys.
Yes, I know you're going to have some of our dope young people come on board. Yes, I'm so excited to hear their segment, and I know they're going to be excellent. So thank you both for your time as well.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Carmen.